Let me tell you something that might sting a little. Most of us walk through life reacting to the text they didn't send, to the tone they used, to the comment that wasn't even about us, but we took it personally anyway. Sound familiar? See, we're taught how to look strong, but we're rarely taught how to be strong on the inside. That's where emotional bulletproofing begins, not in pretending things don't hurt, but in learning how to not give people free access to our peace. You don't control what people say. You do control how you respond. That's power. Yeah. And in this talk, I'm going to show you how to use it. Most people believe emotions are automatic. Something happens and boom, you feel angry, frustrated, embarrassed, or hurt. But that's not entirely true. What actually happens is this: there's an event, then there's a thought, and at NCH, there's a feeling. The reaction doesn't come from the event itself. It comes from the story you tell yourself about that event. And once you understand that, you start to see the space where control lives. Detaching emotion from reaction doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop letting the feeling drive the wheel das Laftrend. Think about how quickly we jump to conclusions. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You feel disrespected. A coworker doesn't respond to your message. You feel ignored. Your partner speaks sharply. You feel unloved. But none of those feelings are facts. They're interpretations. They're instant reactions to stories your mind creates, often based on past wounds or unchecked assumptions. The emotionally bulletproof person knows how to pause that cycle, not by pretending they don't care, but by understanding that their emotions are not instructions. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it. That 1 second of awareness between stimulus and response, that's where your power is. That's where bulletproofing begins. We've been trained by habits, not truth. Maybe your whole life you've reacted quickly to protect yourself. Maybe your anger was a shield. Maybe your silence was a weapon. Maybe your sarcasm was a defense. That's not weakness, it's survival. But survival isn't mastery. And if you want to become emotionally bulletproof, you have to stop outsourcing your inner world to outer circumstances. When someone says something disrespectful, you get to decide, is this worth my energy? Is this about me or about them? You get to filter the moment through clarity, not impulse. That's detachment, not emotional numbness, but emotional clarity. You can still feel things deeply and yet respond with strength, not instability. Here's the truth. Most people who try to push your buttons are just looking for control. The second you react with fire, they win. The second you show them they don't own your reactions, they lose influence over your life. That's emotional bulletproofing in action. You don't get rattled by noise. You don't flinch at shade. You observe, you evaluate, then you choose. It takes practice. It takes discipline. Your mind has to become your ally, not your enemy. And that means building awareness of your triggers, not to avoid them, but to know them. The more you understand what sets you off, the more power you have over what you do next. And over time, people stop having power over you, not because they change, but because you did. Most people react out of habit, not intention. A comment stings and they snap back. A rude look and their face tightens. A perceived slight and the heart starts racing. It's automatic, but automatic isn't always right. That's why mastering the pause before you respond is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. It's not just about slowing down, it's about creating a gap wide enough for wisdom to enter. In that split second between what happens and what you do, there's a choice. But if you never pause, you never see the choice. You just react. And that's where chaos lives, inside unchecked reactions. People who are emotionally reactive often feel like they're being controlled by life. They feel pushed around, manipulated, exhausted. And they're right, because when you don't own your response, you give someone else ownership over your peace. The pause is where ownership begins. It's that moment where you take a breath instead of raising your voice, where you ask yourself, what's really going on here? Instead of jumping into defense mode, it's a tiny delay, but that delay holds massive strength. You don't need to react in 5 seconds. You don't owe anyone a performance. You owe yourself the space to respond with clarity, not ego. Mastering the pause isn't easy because we're wired for speed. Your brain wants to protect you fast. It wants to label, judge, and act. But when you slow it down, when you override that rush, you show your nervous system that you're not in danger. You're in control. You don't need to react to feel powerful. You pause to become powerful. That's the difference between impulsive and intentional. You'll notice that emotionally strong people rarely rush their words. They're calm, measured, direct. That's not accidental. That's trained restraint. It comes from valuing peace over pride. When you learn to pause, you start filtering what matters. You stop letting petty situations steal your energy. Not everything needs a comeback. Not every insult deserves a spotlight. And not every feeling needs an action. Sometimes the most powerful move is to say nothing at all, just for a moment, to sit with your feelings, to watch them rise, to ask, is this mine to carry? Is this real or just my fear talking? That reflection, even if it's just 5 seconds long, can change the whole outcome of a conversation. It can stop an argument before it begins. It can keep a relationship intact. It can save your energy for battles that actually matter. The pause isn't weakness. It's precision. It's awareness. It's choosing your next move like a chess player, not a brawler. You'll start noticing when people are baiting you, when they want to trigger you, when they're pushing for a reaction just to feel powerful themselves. And you'll realize that silence can be a shield, not to avoid truth, but to protect your peace while you decide what truth needs to be spoken. Taking things personally is one of the fastest ways to lose control of your emotions. It turns every disagreement into an attack, every correction into criticism, and every opinion into a judgment. But here's the truth most people miss. What someone says or does is almost always a reflection of them meist, not you. Their bad mood, their sharp tone, their passive-aggressive comment, it's more about what they're carrying than about who you are. When you understand that, you stop absorbing every word as if it's aimed at your soul. We take things personally because of ego, not arrogance, but identity. We think, Quage, they must be talking about me. They must mean something deeper deliced. And the mind fills in the blanks with insecurity. That's where the storm begins, not in the words spoken, but in the interpretation we assign to them. If someone makes a face, we assume we offended them. If someone doesn't invite us, we think we were rejected. But there are always 1,000 explanations for other people's behavior, and very few have anything to do with you. People are living their own stories. They're battling fears, nursing wounds, carrying disappointments. Most of the time, they're not thinking about you at all. And that's not a bad thing. It's freedom. You don't need to read into every silence or overanalyze every comment. You don't need to keep a running list of who didn't clap, who didn't call, or who didn't agree. That's a mental prison built by self-centered thinking. Not arrogance again, but the belief that everything is connected to you. When you stop taking things personally, you regain emotional neutrality. You stop reacting to shadows. You become someone who can stand in a room full of opinions and not feel threatened. You become someone who can receive feedback without spiraling. You listen without defensiveness. You observe without assuming. That doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you don't waste energy fighting ghosts. One of the most powerful questions you can ask in moments of tension is, what else could this mean? That pause allows you to shift from emotional reflex to rational perspective. Maybe they snapped because they're tired. Maybe they're silent because they're overwhelmed. Maybe it has nothing to do with you at all. That kind of mental flexibility is strength. It keeps you from assigning offense where none was intended. There's peace in realizing you don't need to attend every emotional invitation you're handed. You don't need to chase every comment, every look, every decision made without you. The emotionally bulletproof person knows how to let things pass. They don't flinch at every breeze. They don't build stories out of fragments. They stay grounded in their own self-worth, so they're not constantly scanning for signs of rejection or disrespect. They know that not every no is a judgment, not every silence is an insult, and not every opinion deserves a reaction. Setting boundaries is not about pushing people away. It's about protecting your energy, your time, and your emotional well-being. Most people struggle with boundaries because they associate them with guilt. They're afraid to say no. afraid to disappoint, afraid to come off as rude or selfish. So they tolerate more than they should, absorb more than they can handle, and slowly become bitter, exhausted, and emotionally reactive. That's not kindness. That's self-neglect in disguise. When you build boundaries without guilt, you're telling the world, I respect myself enough to protect my peace. It's not about control. It's about clarity. This is what I accept. This is what I won't tolerate. This is where I end and you begin. Emotionally bulletproof people understand that clear boundaries are not walls. They're filters. They don't shut people out. They keep the wrong behaviors out. Most emotional burnout doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from doing too much for people who take too much and give too little. That imbalance builds silently. It starts with small things. A favor you didn't want to do, a message you didn't want to respond to, a conversation you weren't ready for. And over time, it grows into resentment. Not because people are bad, but because you didn't protect your limits early enough. Guilt is the enemy of strong boundaries. It whispers lies like you're being selfish or they won't like you if you say no. But here's the truth. The people who benefit from your lack of boundaries are the ones most bothered when you finally set them. And that discomfort isn't your problem to solve. You are not responsible for how others feel about the limits you place to protect your emotional health. Boundaries don't require justification. You don't need a 2-minute explanation for why you're unavailable, unwilling, or uninterested. A simple no can be a full sentence. A delayed reply can be a healthy choice. A canceled plan can be self-respect. When you remove guilt from the equation, your decisions become clearer. You stop apologizing for honoring your needs. You stop seeking approval for taking care of yourself. Emotionally strong people know how to enforce boundaries calmly and consistently. They don't yell, they don't over-explain, they don't beg to be understood. They just draw the line and hold it. If someone crosses it, they respond with firmness, not fury. Because the power in boundaries comes from follow-through. Not from how loud you say it, but how clearly you stick to it when it's tested. The goal isn't to control others, it's to regulate yourself so that your emotions aren't constantly hijacked by guilt, obligation, or fear of rejection, so that your energy isn't drained by relationships that expect more than they give, so that your peace isn't disrupted by chaos that isn't yours to carry. Boundaries are how you stay emotionally clean in a world full of emotional mess. Most people wait for their emotions to shift before they take action. They think they need to feel motivated to be disciplined or feel calm before they can respond maturely. But the truth is, your mood isn't the right driver. Your mind is. If you want to become emotionally bulletproof, you have to train your mind, not just hope your mood behaves. Because moods are temporary, but mindset is trained. And the more you train your thinking, the more consistent your emotional responses become. No matter what kind of day you're having. Training your mind starts with awareness. You have to notice the patterns. What sets you off? What makes you spiral? What kind of situations cause you to lose your center? Most people don't take the time to study their own triggers, and that leaves them vulnerable. They're reactive because they don't realize how much of their emotional life is being driven by unconscious thought loops. But once you see the pattern, you can start rewriting it. That's mental training. Observing without judgment and choosing a new response. A trained mind questions assumptions. Doesn't just accept the first thought that shows up. It doesn't cling to old stories like I always get disrespected or I can't handle stress. It steps back, it challenges, it reframes. That's how you stop the cycle of overthinking, overreacting, and overheating emotionally. You replace automatic thoughts with conscious ones. And over time, those conscious thoughts become your new default. You also have to feed your mind intentionally. What you consume mentally shapes your emotional tone. If you're constantly scrolling through negativity, surrounding yourself with toxic conversations, or replaying past drama, you're not building a strong mindset. You're weakening it. Training your mind means being selective about what you watch, what you listen to, who you spend time around. It's not about being naive, it's about being strategic. You're not avoiding reality. You're curating your inputs so your outputs stay grounded. Another key part of mental training is self-talk. Most people speak to themselves in ways they'd never speak to a friend. Harsh, critical, dismissive. And that voice becomes the soundtrack in high-pressure moments. If you want emotional control, your internal dialogue has to shift. You have to replace "I can't handle this" with "I'm built for this." You have to stop labeling yourself as reactive and start claiming your ability to respond with strength. That's not delusion. It's mental conditioning. Consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need an hour of mindset work a day. You need a few intentional moments, repeated daily, a moment to breathe before you speak, a moment to rewrite a negative thought, a moment to sit with discomfort instead of reacting to it. These small acts of mental discipline stack over time. They become your emotional armor. Not because you never feel anything, but because your emotions no longer dictate everything. You stay steady, not because life gets easier, but because your mind gets stronger. Your peace is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Yet most people treat it like an afterthought, something they'll get to once everything else is handled. But if you don't protect your peace like it's priceless, you'll find yourself constantly drained, constantly triggered, constantly overwhelmed by things that don't deserve that much of you. So emotional bulletproofing begins with making your peace non-negotiable. It's not selfish, it's survival. Because when your mind is constantly under attack, your clarity disappears, your reactions get sharper, and your relationships suffer. Protecting your peace means getting selective. Not everyone deserves access to your time, your attention, or your emotional bandwidth. There are people who thrive on chaos, who stir up drama wherever they go. There are conversations that don't go anywhere except down. There are habits that keep your nervous system on edge. If you're not careful, these things will eat away at your stability until you start thinking emotional exhaustion is normal. But peace isn't found in perfect conditions. It's built by conscious choices in imperfect moments. You protect your peace by choosing your battles. Not everything is worth your voice. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every disagreement requires you to prove a point. Emotional maturity means understanding that some things are better left unanswered. That silence can be stronger than shouting. That walking away can be braver than staying to fight. Your peace matters more than your pride. And when you start living that truth, your reactions become more intentional, more focused, more calm. Another part of protecting your peace is managing your environment. This isn't just about physical space. It's about energy, who you let near you, what you let in your mind, and what you accept as normal. If your surroundings are full of noise, judgment, or pressure, your mind will mirror that. But if your space reflects calm, boundaries, and purpose, your emotional responses will follow. Peace is contagious, but so is chaos. You have to be ruthless about what energy you allow in your space. It also means setting daily emotional check-ins with yourself. How am I feeling? What am I holding on to? What can I let go of? Most people carry around emotional baggage without even realizing it. Thoughts from last week, conversations from last year, wounds from 10 years ago. Protecting your peace means being willing to release what no longer belongs. You're not required to carry pain just because you're used to it. You protect your peace by living on your own terms, not trying to meet everyone's expectations, not bending over backwards for validation, not hustling for approval from people who wouldn't care if you burned out. When your worth is rooted internally, not externally, peace becomes your default. You don't chase it. You hold it. You build routines that anchor it. You create distance where it's needed. You say no without guilt. You speak gently to yourself in moments of failure. You become a safe place for your own emotions to land, even when the world feels unstable.